The biggest mistake people make is believing they know someone's story just by looking at them. Those words would later describe what happened on a quiet highway outside Norfolk, Virginia, but at that moment nobody understood how important they would become. The morning started like any other. Cars moved along the road. People traveled to work. The sound of daily life continued without anyone expecting a simple traffic stop to become a lesson about judgment, responsibility, and respect. Behind the wheel of a dark sedan was a man named Marcus Whitaker. He was calm, focused, and dressed in simple clothing. There was nothing about his appearance that revealed the decades of service behind him. No military uniform, no visible medals, no group of people announcing his arrival. To anyone passing by, he looked like an ordinary driver heading somewhere important. But Marcus Whitaker was not an ordinary person. For more than 35 years, he had served in the United States Navy. Through years of dedication and leadership, he had risen to the rank of 4-star Admiral. He had carried responsibilities that affected thousands of sailors and helped guide important decisions throughout his career. Yet on this morning, he was not thinking about his rank. He was not looking for special treatment. He was simply driving to a scheduled meeting near a naval facility, hoping to arrive without unnecessary attention. A small issue changed everything. A damaged taillight had caught the attention of Officer Jason Caldwell, a local police officer responsible for traffic enforcement in the area. From the outside, it appeared to be a routine stop. A vehicle, a traffic concern, a conversation between an officer and a driver. But sometimes, the most important moments in life begin with situations that seem completely ordinary. Officer Caldwell approached the vehicle and began asking questions. Marcus responded respectfully. His voice remained calm. His answers were clear. He understood that officers had responsibilities, and he respected the role they played in keeping communities safe. But as the conversation continued, something felt different. Officer Caldwell looked at the situation and saw only what was immediately visible. He saw a black man in a regular vehicle. He saw someone without a uniform or obvious signs of authority. He did not see the decades of leadership behind the person sitting in front of him. He did not see the sailors who had learned from Marcus. He did not see the countless hours of service that shaped the man he was questioning. Marcus noticed the change in the officer's tone, but he remained composed. Throughout his career, he had learned that leadership was not about controlling every situation. It was about controlling yourself when situations became difficult. "Officer," Marcus said calmly, "I understand you are doing your job. I only ask that the same respect given to the uniform is also given to the person standing before it." The sentence was simple, but it carried the wisdom of a lifetime. Nearby, a few people began noticing the interaction. They did not know who Marcus was. They did not know what he had accomplished. They only saw a man remaining patient while a small misunderstanding continued to grow. And that was the moment that made the situation different. Because the person being judged was not just another driver on the road. He was someone whose entire life had been dedicated to serving others. But for now, that truth remained hidden. And within the next few minutes, the world around that quiet road was about to discover who was truly standing there. The road outside Norfolk, Virginia remained busy as the morning continued, but the conversation between Marcus Whitaker and Officer Jason Caldwell had created a moment that felt separate from the rest of the world. Cars continued passing by. People continued with their daily routines. Yet beside the dark sedan, two very different perspectives were standing face to face. Officer Caldwell believed he was handling a normal traffic situation. Marcus understood that moments like this often revealed something much deeper about people and the choices they made. Marcus had spent more than 3 decades in the United States Navy learning one important lesson. A person's true character was not revealed when everything was easy. It was revealed when circumstances became uncomfortable. During his years of service, he had worked with thousands of sailors from different backgrounds and different experiences. He had seen talented leaders come from unexpected places. He had learned that respect was not something earned only by rank. It was something every person deserved from the beginning. That belief guided him now as he stood beside his vehicle. Officer Caldwell continued reviewing the situation. The broken taillight was a simple issue, something that could normally be resolved within minutes. But the conversation had become more complicated because of the assumptions surrounding it. Caldwell looked at Marcus and saw a person he believed he already understood. He saw a driver who did not appear to have any special status. He saw someone who was not wearing a uniform or displaying a title. But Marcus knew something that Caldwell did not. The most important parts of a person's story are often the parts that cannot be seen immediately. "Do you have any identification with you?" Officer Caldwell asked. Marcus provided what was requested and remained cooperative. He had no interest in creating conflict. He understood that following procedures was part of a functioning society. But he also believed that procedures worked best when they were carried out with fairness and respect. As the interaction continued, a few people nearby began paying attention. Not because of loud voices or a dramatic scene, but because of the contrast between the two men. Officer Caldwell appeared focused on control. Marcus appeared focused on understanding. One person was looking at the situation from the outside. The other was carrying a lifetime of experience that could not be measured by appearance alone. A young Navy officer passing through the area briefly noticed Marcus. Something about the man seemed familiar. The calm posture, the way he listened before speaking, the confidence without the need to prove anything. The officer slowed down for a moment, wondering if he had seen him before. But before he could say anything, the moment continued. Marcus looked toward the road and then back at Caldwell. "Officer, I respect the responsibility you carry," Marcus said. "But every person deserves the chance to be understood before they are judged." The words were quiet, but they carried weight. Caldwell listened, but he still believed he was simply doing what his position required. He did not yet understand that the person in front of him had spent a lifetime studying leadership, decision-making, and responsibility. He did not know that Marcus was someone many people in the Navy looked up to. He did not know that the man standing beside a regular vehicle had once stood in rooms where decisions affected thousands of lives. The truth was still hidden, but small signs were beginning to appear. Passing glance, a familiar voice, a feeling that something about this situation was not what it seemed. And as more people started to notice, the question became clearer. Who was the man that Officer Caldwell had chosen to judge before knowing his story? The quiet road outside Norfolk, Virginia had become the center of a moment that nobody expected. What should have been a brief conversation about a damaged taillight had slowly turned into something much larger. Marcus Whitaker remained beside his vehicle with the same calm expression he had shown from the beginning. He understood that patience was sometimes the strongest response a person could choose. Throughout his career as a United States Navy leader, Marcus had learned that every situation revealed something about the people involved. Not just the person being questioned, but also the person asking the questions. Officer Jason Caldwell continued reviewing the details in front of him. He looked through the information available and tried to understand why Marcus remained so composed. Most people in a stressful situation became nervous. They rushed to explain themselves. They tried to convince others of their importance. Marcus did none of that. He simply stood there, respectful and steady, allowing the situation to unfold naturally. What Caldwell did not understand was that Marcus had spent decades in environments where pressure was normal. As a four-star admiral, he had faced decisions where the outcome affected thousands of people. He had learned to listen carefully, speak thoughtfully, and never allow emotion to control his judgment. Those lessons stayed with him even in the smallest moments. A traffic stop, a simple conversation, a misunderstanding between two people. To Marcus, every interaction mattered. Nearby, the young Navy officer who had noticed Marcus earlier returned from the area. His curiosity had grown stronger. He looked again at Marcus and paid closer attention. There was something about him that felt familiar. It was not the clothing. It was not anything obvious. It was the way Marcus carried himself. The quiet confidence, the respectful tone, the presence of someone who had spent years leading others. The young officer approached carefully and looked at Marcus. Before he could speak, Officer Caldwell turned his attention back to the situation. He still believed he was simply performing his duty. He believed he was following the correct process. But sometimes, people can follow a process while missing the purpose behind it. Marcus noticed the young officer nearby but remained focused on keeping the conversation respectful. "Officer Caldwell," Marcus said, "there is nothing wrong with asking questions. Questions help keep people safe. But the answers should always be guided by fairness." Caldwell looked at him for a moment. The statement was not an accusation. It was not an attack. It was simply a reminder that every person standing before an authority figure is still a person first. The young Navy officer finally recognized something. He had seen Marcus before, not on a regular day, not in a casual setting. He had seen his image during Navy leadership briefings. He had heard his name mentioned by people who spoke about service and dedication. His eyes widened slightly as the realization began forming. The man standing beside the road was not just another driver. He was someone whose career represented decades of commitment to the Navy. But before the young officer could say anything, the moment remained quiet. Marcus did not reveal himself. He did not need to. He had always believed that character should be visible even before a title is known. Officer Caldwell still looked at the situation through the information he had. He saw a traffic stop. He saw a driver. He saw a problem to resolve. He did not yet see the person behind the ordinary appearance. But the truth was getting closer. And soon, the name Marcus Whitaker would change the way everyone understood that moment. The road outside Norfolk, Virginia remained quiet, but the situation beside Marcus Whitaker's vehicle was becoming impossible for people nearby to ignore. What started as a simple traffic concern had turned into a moment where patience, judgment, and responsibility were being tested. Marcus continued standing calmly, showing the same discipline he had carried throughout his decades of service. He understood something that many people only learned after years of experience. A person's true character was revealed not when they had complete control, but when they were placed in a situation where they had every reason to react. Officer Jason Caldwell looked over the information again. He still believed he was handling a routine matter. He believed he was protecting the community and following his responsibility as an officer. But the longer the conversation continued, the more obvious it became that something about the situation was different. Marcus was not behaving like someone trying to avoid questions. He was not attempting to use influence. He was simply asking to be treated with the same fairness he believed every person deserved. "Officer Caldwell," Marcus said, "authority is important. People depend on those who carry it. But authority becomes meaningful only when it is used with judgment." Those words stayed in the air for a moment. They were not spoken with anger. They were spoken with the calm confidence of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding leadership. Nearby, the young Navy officer who recognized Marcus began moving closer. He looked uncertain at first, almost as if he was trying to confirm what he already suspected. The man beside the vehicle looked familiar because he was familiar. He had seen Marcus's name before. He had heard senior leaders speak about his career. He knew that the quiet person standing there was not simply another driver on the road. As he approached, another person nearby noticed the reaction and asked what was happening. The young officer hesitated before answering. "I think I know who that is," he said quietly. Officer Caldwell heard the conversation and turned his attention toward them. For the first time, a small doubt appeared. He realized there were details about Marcus that he did not know. There were parts of the story he had not considered. Marcus noticed the change but remained calm. He had seen this kind of moment many times before. People often changed their behavior after learning someone's title or position. But Marcus believed the real measure of fairness was how someone acted before knowing those things. That was why he had not immediately introduced himself as an admiral. He wanted the situation to reveal something more important than rank. He wanted to see whether respect existed before recognition. The young Navy officer finally stepped forward. He looked at Marcus carefully and spoke with genuine surprise. "Sir, are you Admiral Whitaker?" The question changed the atmosphere instantly. A few people nearby looked toward Marcus. Officer Caldwell became quiet. The name carried meaning. It represented decades of service, leadership, and commitment. The man he had been questioning was not simply someone passing through the area. He was a 4-star admiral in the United States Navy. Marcus gave a small nod. Yes, I am. There was no pride in his voice. No attempt to make anyone feel embarrassed. Just the simple truth. In that moment, everyone understood that the situation had never been about a broken taillight. It was about what happens when people judge a person before knowing their story. And as the truth finally came into view, the balance of the moment began to shift. The moment Admiral Marcus Whitaker's identity became known, the atmosphere beside the road changed completely. But the most surprising part was not that people recognized his rank. It was the way Marcus reacted after the truth was revealed. Many people expected a powerful leader to immediately focus on what had happened to him. They expected anger. They expected demands. They expected someone with authority to use that authority to take control of the situation. Instead, Marcus remained exactly the same person he had been from the beginning. Calm, respectful, focused on understanding rather than blame. Officer Jason Caldwell stood quietly, processing everything that had happened. The man he had questioned was not simply a driver involved in a traffic stop. He was a 4-star admiral in the United States Navy, a person whose career represented decades of service and leadership. Caldwell looked back at the beginning of the interaction and realized something uncomfortable. He had spent the entire time trying to determine who Marcus was, but he had never considered what Marcus had already done. He had looked for signs of importance instead of recognizing the person in front of him. Marcus noticed the change in Caldwell's expression. He understood that moments like this could be difficult because they force people to look honestly at their own decisions. But Marcus also knew that growth did not come from embarrassment. It came from reflection. Officer Caldwell, Marcus said calmly, the important lesson here is not that I am an admiral. The important lesson is that every person deserves to be treated fairly before anyone knows their position. Those words surprised the people standing nearby, because Marcus was not trying to prove that he was more important. He was reminding everyone that importance should not determine basic respect. A person's title should never be the reason they receive fairness. Fairness should come first. The young Navy officer who had recognized Marcus introduced himself and explained that he had followed the Admiral's career for years. He described how many sailors respected Marcus not because of his rank, but because of the way he treated people. Marcus listened and smiled. He had always believed that leadership was measured by the trust people placed in you, not just the authority attached to your position. As more people gathered near the roadside, the story began to spread. Some expected the situation to become a confrontation between a high-ranking military leader and a local officer. But Marcus did not see it that way. He saw an opportunity to address something much bigger. The issue was not one traffic stop. The issue was how quickly assumptions could influence decisions. Officer Caldwell eventually apologized for the way the situation had developed. Marcus accepted the apology but did not focus on himself. Instead, he asked a question that stayed with everyone who heard it. What can we learn from this so the next person has a better experience? That question changed the direction of the moment. It moved the conversation away from blame and toward responsibility. Caldwell realized that the true challenge of his position was not simply knowing the rules. It was understanding the people those rules were meant to serve. Marcus had the ability to turn the moment into a personal victory, but he chose something different. He chose to make it a lesson. And as the road slowly returned to normal, everyone nearby understood that the most powerful part of the encounter was not discovering who Marcus Whitaker was. It was discovering the kind of leader he had always been. The roadside encounter had ended, but the questions it created were only beginning. For Officer Jason Caldwell, the moment stayed in his mind long after Marcus Whitaker left the area. It was easy to focus on the fact that the driver had been a 4-star admiral. It was easy to think the lesson was simply about recognizing someone's rank. But the more Caldwell reflected, the more he understood that the real lesson was much deeper. The situation had never been about discovering that Marcus was important. It had been about how Marcus deserved to be treated before anyone knew his name. In the days that followed, the conversation reached people beyond the roadside where it happened. Leaders within the local department began reviewing what had taken place, not because Marcus demanded attention, but because moments like this required honest examination. A community built on trust had to be willing to look at difficult situations and ask better questions. Marcus was contacted by several officials who wanted to understand his perspective. He spoke with the same calm approach he had shown from the beginning. He did not describe himself as a victim. He did not seek personal recognition. Instead, he focused on the larger issue. The goal should not be finding someone to blame, Marcus explained. The goal should be understanding what happened and making sure we continue improving. Those words reflected the kind of leadership that had defined his entire career. As a Navy admiral, Marcus had spent years making decisions where accountability mattered. He understood that strong organizations were not built by pretending mistakes never happened. They were built by learning from those moments. Officer Caldwell also had to face the situation honestly. He realized that responsibility involved more than knowing procedures. It involved understanding the people affected by those procedures. He thought about the beginning of the traffic stop and remembered how quickly he had formed an opinion. He had seen a situation. He had not seen the person. That realization became the most important part of the experience for him. A few weeks later, Marcus visited a naval facility for another scheduled event. During a conversation with younger service members, he shared a lesson that had guided him for decades. Leadership begins with how you treat people when you have no reason to expect anything from them. The sailors listening understood that the message was not only about military service. It applied everywhere, in every workplace, in every community, in every interaction between people. The story of the roadside encounter continued to be discussed, but not because a powerful person had been involved. It was remembered because of the choice Marcus made. He had the ability to make the situation about his position. Instead, he made it about a principle. He showed that real influence comes from how a person responds when they have every reason to react differently. Officer Caldwell learned that a badge represented responsibility, not superiority. Marcus demonstrated that a title represented service, not privilege. Two people in very different positions walked away from the same moment with a deeper understanding of what respect truly meant. And as the conversation moved beyond that single day, one truth became clear. The most important thing people carry is not always visible. Sometimes it is hidden behind ordinary clothes, a quiet voice, and a lifetime of service waiting to be recognized. The days following the roadside encounter brought a different kind of attention to everyone involved. For Marcus Whitaker, life continued with the same discipline and purpose that had guided him for decades. Meetings continued. Responsibilities continued. The mission remained the same. But for those who had learned about what happened, the moment became a reminder that important lessons often appear in unexpected places. The conversation was no longer only about one traffic stop. It had become a discussion about trust, judgment, and the responsibility that comes with authority. Within the department, leaders began taking a closer look at how officers approached everyday interactions. They understood that public trust was built through thousands of small moments, not just major decisions. Every conversation mattered. Every choice mattered. Every person involved represented something larger than themselves. Officer Jason Caldwell experienced the situation differently from everyone else. He was not just hearing about the event from a distance. He had been standing there. He had been the person making decisions in that moment. That meant he had to look deeper than anyone else. He thought about Marcus's calm response. He thought about the way the Admiral never tried to use his position to escape questions. He thought about how easily the entire situation could have been different if Marcus had reacted with frustration instead of patience. But Marcus had chosen another path. He had shown that strength was not always found in controlling others. Sometimes strength was found in controlling yourself. As conversations continued, Marcus was invited to speak with community leaders and law enforcement representatives about his experience. He accepted, not because he wanted recognition, but because he believed every difficult moment could become a chance to improve. He shared that people in positions of authority carried a responsibility that extended beyond their job description. A position gives you power, Marcus said, but your choices determine whether people trust that power. Those words became the foundation of the discussion. The goal was not to create division. The goal was to create understanding. Marcus believed that progress came when people were willing to listen, learn, and make better decisions in the future. Officer Caldwell also became part of that reflection. He understood that accountability was not about being defined by one moment. It was about what a person chose to do after that moment. He began approaching his responsibilities with a greater awareness of the importance of patience and fairness. He learned that every person he met had a story that might never be visible at first glance. The lesson extended beyond Marcus and Caldwell. It reached everyone who heard about the encounter. A person driving an ordinary car could be a leader. A quiet voice could belong to someone with decades of experience. A simple conversation could reveal the difference between authority and wisdom. Marcus had spent his career serving others, but one of his most meaningful lessons came from a moment when nobody knew his name. That was what made the experience so powerful. The respect shown after his identity was revealed mattered, but the respect shown before it was known mattered even more. Because true fairness is not measured by how people treat those they admire. It is measured by how they treat those they do not yet understand. And that lesson continued to move far beyond the roadside where everything began. The conversation that began on a quiet road outside Norfolk continued to create changes far beyond that single moment. What started as a misunderstanding between two people became an opportunity for many others to reflect on the meaning of responsibility. For Marcus Whitaker, the experience reinforced something he had believed throughout his entire career. Leadership was not measured by how much authority someone could display. It was measured by how that authority was used when nobody was watching. Weeks after the encounter, Marcus returned to his regular responsibilities. His schedule remained filled with meetings, discussions, and decisions that required focus. Yet whenever people asked about what happened, he always brought the conversation back to the same message. The goal was never to prove that one person was more important than another. The goal was to remind people that every individual deserved dignity from the beginning. Within the police department, leaders continued reviewing the situation and discussing ways to strengthen trust between officers and the communities they served. They understood that public confidence was built through everyday interactions. A single conversation could influence how people viewed an entire organization. That responsibility was something every officer carried. Officer Jason Caldwell became especially aware of this. The moment stayed with him because it challenged the way he viewed his own role. Before that day, he believed professionalism was mainly about knowing procedures and following instructions. After that day, he understood that professionalism also required awareness, patience, and the ability to recognize the person behind every situation. He thought about Marcus standing beside the vehicle without revealing his rank. He thought about how differently people reacted once they learned he was a four-star admiral. That difference became the most important lesson. Respect should not appear only after someone's achievements become visible. It should exist before those achievements are known. Marcus later spoke with a group of young leaders about the importance of character. He explained that every person in a position of responsibility would eventually face moments where their judgment was tested. The easiest person to respect is someone you already admire, Marcus said. The real test is how you treat someone when you know nothing about them. The message stayed with everyone who heard it. It was not only about law enforcement. It was about every workplace, every community, and every relationship between people. The story of the roadside encounter continued spreading, but the focus was not on the conflict. It was on the lesson that followed. A police officer learned that authority required humility. A Navy admiral showed that influence did not require anger, and everyone who witnessed the moment saw how a difficult situation could become a chance for growth. Marcus never considered himself above anyone because of his position. In fact, his years of service had taught him the opposite. The higher someone rises, the greater their responsibility becomes to understand others. That belief shaped the way he led, the way he spoke, and the way he responded when challenged. The roadside where the encounter began eventually returned to being just another place on the map. Cars continued passing. People continued their daily routines. But for those who knew what happened there, it represented something more. It became a reminder that appearances can hide important truths, and that every person carries a story that deserves to be understood before judgment is made. Months after the moment that changed the way many people viewed a simple roadside interaction, Marcus Whitaker continued living by the same principles that had guided him throughout his entire career. He did not seek attention. He did not look back at the experience as a personal victory. Instead, he viewed it as a reminder of something he had learned through decades of service. Every person has a responsibility to choose what kind of impact they leave behind. For Marcus, leadership had never been about receiving recognition. It had always been about serving others, building trust, and making decisions with fairness and wisdom. The story of what happened outside Norfolk continued to be remembered, not because a famous person had been involved, but because of the lesson hidden inside the moment. A person who appeared ordinary carried a lifetime of extraordinary service. A conversation that seemed small revealed something much larger about judgment and understanding. Officer Jason Caldwell also carried the memory with him. The experience changed the way he approached his responsibilities. He realized that every interaction represented more than just a single decision. It represented the values behind the badge he carried. He understood that people often show the most about themselves in moments when they believe nobody important is watching. But Marcus had shown that every person is important, regardless of what others know about them. Over time, Caldwell became more thoughtful in the way he approached situations. He listened more carefully. He asked more questions before reaching conclusions. He remembered that behind every person was a story he might never see. The lesson did not come from a punishment or a public argument. It came from a conversation that allowed two people to see the world from a different perspective. Marcus continued speaking to military members, community groups, and future leaders about the importance of character. He often reminded them that positions and titles were temporary, but the way people treated others could leave a lasting impression. A person's true strength is not shown by how much power they have, Marcus explained. It is shown by how responsibly they use it. Those words represented everything that happened that day. The Admiral had the authority to make the moment about himself, but he chose to make it about a principle. He chose understanding over anger. He chose growth over blame. And that choice became the most powerful part of the story. The road where the encounter began returned to normal. The traffic continued. The world continued moving forward. But the people who knew the story carried a different understanding with them. They knew that appearances could be misleading. They knew that a quiet person could carry decades of achievement. They knew that respect should never depend on discovering someone's title first. Because the greatest measure of character is not how someone treats people they admire. It is how they treat people they do not yet understand. Marcus Whitaker's journey had taken him through years of service, leadership, and responsibility. Yet one of the most meaningful lessons came from a moment when nobody recognized his name. He showed that true authority does not need to announce itself. True leadership does not need to demand respect. It earns it through patience, fairness, and the way a person chooses to treat others. And in the end, the most important thing revealed on that quiet road was not the identity of a Navy Admiral. It was the power of seeing a person before seeing a label.